Hey everybody, it's Tabitha with another Wednesday art snack for you. Um, so what I've got here is another value chart, and if you've been following along, last week we did a grayscale value chart, so black and white basically. And here I've done it with cerulean blue. And this is a great thing to do with whatever color you feel like. I definitely recommend you do it with the primary colors, if not more. And again, if you are keeping a book, a journal, mixed media book, this is great to have in your book to refer back to. So I like to label everything. So you see on the top here, I wrote the color. And I'm actually, since colors vary from brand to brand, I'm going to put the brand name on here and try writing, if you can, before everything dries, because it can be very messy. That's my first tip. So this is the Meininger brand. So basically what we did here is I'm working with tints, shades, and tones. So a tint of a color is anytime you add white and it lightens that color, you're making a tint. So it just gets lighter and lighter and lighter the more white you add. If you're darkening it with whatever color you put in there, usually black, we call it a shade. So it just got darker and darker and darker. It's much trickier adding black to a color than it is adding white. So if you look at these are much better as far as getting darker every step of the way. And here they get a little wonky. It's not so easy, which is why it's a really good exercise for you to do. Now over here we have tones. So what a tone is desaturating the color. So you can do that by either adding gray or by adding the color's complement. And if you don't know what that means, refer back to the color wheel here. And a complementary color is opposite on the color wheel. So we can see right here I mixed orange with blue to neutralize it. And if you just put a little tiny bit of orange into your blue or blue into your orange, it will neutralize it a little bit. If you put a lot, it's going to come up with a neutral color, which we commonly refer to this as mud. I don't really like that term because neutral colors are very useful. So, in this experiment, and it's really fun to experiment with these things, I labeled everything. So this is the full strength cerulean blue. I don't know if you can read any of this. Here I mixed it with light gray. Here I mixed it with a medium gray, and here I mixed it with dark gray. And here I mixed it with cadmium orange. So it really does make a difference. And I drew lines here because I thought that was close to the same value. Not the same color, but if you remember, a value is the lightness or darkness of a color. So it's close to the same lightness or darkness. It's probably in between those somewhere, but it's less saturated. This is a brighter blue. And this is very similar to this in value, or actually in between these two, but this is brighter than this. This is a little bit more dull. And sometimes you want really bright poppy colors. Sometimes you want them to be a little bit more muted. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use a deep magenta. So I'm just going to flip this page over, try and work with this an open book so I can have that as a reference. So all I'm using today is my trusty palette knife, my fancy palette here. Put the blue paint away. I'm using white, deep magenta, and black. And by the way, these are 3 different brands. You'll notice I use what I've got. I'm not an art supply snob. I do like the good art supplies, but, you know, whatever works. All right, so here we go. Squeeze some white out onto my palette and some magenta. And some black. In a perfect world, I would have left more space because I do want them in this order. And make sure you've got a towel or a rag handy to wipe off your palette knife because we're going to be doing that a lot. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a very pale, it's going to end up being pink, first. And then I'll put the full strength in the middle, and then the darkest value on the end. And then I'll work in from there. So, when you're mixing paint, especially if you don't know what's going to happen, never mix a whole pile into another pile because you might end up with a whole pile that you need to throw away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scooch some of this white over here, wipe off my palette knife, scooch some of the magenta over towards the white. Now, mix in small amounts, especially when you're doing a value chart. You just want a tiny bit of the darker color into more of the white, because the darker color is stronger. And I want to make it pretty pale. So I've got too much magenta on here, so I'm going to wipe it off on my towel. The other thing you can do, which I do sometimes, is to have a piece of paper or even a little canvas board, and I start wiping my brush on that. And it's a basic basis for a cool abstract painting. All right, so I'm going to see how pale I can go while still seeing the color. I mean, I could go a lot more pale, I suppose. Let's see. I want it to look pink and not an off-white. That's my goal here. Yours might be different. You might just want a really off-white. All right, so there's my first lightest value that I'm going to have. I'm going to put it way up here. I'm just going to lay it on there. And I'm going really, really light touch, almost like I'm frosting a cake. And so I want it thick. And you can probably barely see that. I don't know if that helped or not. All right, wipe off my palette knife. Go in for the pure magenta right in the middle here. Wipe off my palette knife again. And then I'm going to scooch a little bit of that black over, get it separate from the other black, and start mixing a really dark magenta. Too dark, wipe off that palette knife, scooch some more magenta in there. Oh, that's so pretty. You can see that. It's gorgeous. It's like a deep berry color. And I think I'm going to use that as my dark value. So I'm going to put that at the very end. Oh, it's so pretty. It's almost a purple. So it's really fun to do things like this because you learn things like, oh, I need a deep purple, but I don't have it. Well, let's put some black and magenta and see if that works. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm coming back up to this light value. Ooh, I'm already a mess. And I'm going to try and make a value right in between these two. So I'm leaving this whole dark area over here because I don't want to get any of that black paint in here. And as a matter of fact, I have some of this light pink left, so I'm just going to add a little bit of magenta to it. So I'm not reinventing the wheel here. And then just look at it. Does that look halfway through? I think that still looks too light. So I'm going to scoop a little more. I'm going to add some, but I'm only going to do it to a part of it. I'm going to leave some of that. That might be my second lightest value. I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to scoop some of that on the back of my palette knife and smash it gently, right in the middle between those two. And now, do I think that other pink, I still think that pink is too light to be my second lightest value, so I'm going to add a little bit of magenta in there. Maybe a little more. So again, I'm looking for halfway in between those two values. So I'm going to grab some on the back of my palette knife and put it down and see if that looks right. I think that's leaning a little bit towards the dark now, so I'm going to add a little bit of white in there. So, you might have to go back and forth with this, and that's okay. Now see, I think I got it too light. This is an exercise. Just think of this as an exercise, as an experiment. You're a paint scientist. Yeah, that's not too bad. For time's sake, I'm going to leave that as is. And then I'm going to look for a middle ground between these two. So this is a slightly darker, I think, than what I've got there. So let me add some more. And a little bit more. Always go slowly with that dark color. Just add a little bit at a time. Oh, still not dark enough. There we go. Man, I really went light with that. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. Bum, 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 bum. All right. Now it gets a little bit trickier with these darker values. So I'm going to mix the magenta and black and look for a value right in between these. Now that magenta is pretty dark to begin with, so the difference in color is not going to be all that pronounced. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. A bit more magenta here. And I'm going to put it off to the side because I'm going to need some for some pure magenta here for the tones. So when you're mixing with a palette knife, if you have a good one like this, you can stir with the tip of the knife and you can scrape it and flip it and fold it and smash it around. And one thing you can do, if you're not sure about these tones because the colors are so dark, you can spread this out a little bit. Now, of course, if it's not mixed together that well, you'll see the color separation there. But sometimes it helps to thin it out a little bit to see the color. All right. Add a little bit of white into... Whoops, that's not what I was going after. Sorry. A little bit of magenta into the black. Yeah, it is really hard to see the difference because I started with such a dark color. But it's good to be able to mix these variations. All right, we're going to call that decent enough for the moment. Okay, tones. I'm going to take... And actually, before I do this, I'm going to label this because before I get paint on here, I want to write what this is. So this is deep magenta. Artist Loft is the brand. And this is the base color. And here we have tints. And here we have shades. And here we're going to do tones. All right. Do you remember what that is? What a tone is? It's pretty easy to remember because we use the word tone in this way. We want to tone the magenta down. We want to make it not so bright, but not so light either. And maybe not so dark. So what I'm going to do is mix some gray. So I'm going to take this black. Boy, this is a messy palette. Bring it over near this white. And I'm going to mix 3 values of gray. So there's my light value. Lighten that up, that's not very light. And we don't need a whole lot because we're just going to mix it with the magenta. Now I'll mix a slightly darker value. Try and keep it away from your magenta. This is kind of sloppy of me. Do as I say, not as I do, right? So I'm going to call this my medium gray. Of course, it's all subjective, isn't it? This is why we say value is the relative color, or the relative lightness or darkness of a color, because it really depends on what's next to it. Is that dark or is that light? Well, it's light compared to the black, but it's dark compared to the white. All right, and here will be my dark gray, which it's going to be super dark with that magenta, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so I have my 3 gray values. Bring some magenta over here. And mix a tiny bit of that light gray into the magenta. Now this is not very scientific because although I'm making notes, I'm not writing how much I'm mixing with how much. But the more you do this, the more you'll just get a sense of it. All right, so here's my light tone. So value wise, as in lightness or darkness, it's very similar to this one, but it's not as bright. It's grayed down a bit. And I just need some fresh magenta. See, this is what happens when you don't keep your colors separated enough. You end up having to get fresh paint. All right, so some fresh magenta here and my medium value of gray. Ooh, that's pretty. I like that color. So it's slightly darker. And finally, my dark gray. Now, depending on how much gray you use as opposed to how much magenta, you might get a warm gray or a cool magenta, depending on the tone of your gray, I suppose. Yeah, so you can see how this is unlike any of these. So I will just make some notes quick. I'm just going to make an arrow so we know that this is the base color. And we mixed with light, gray, medium gray with dark gray. Now, I would like to mix this with its complement. So I'm going to call this a red-violet. So if we look at the color wheel, yellow-green is going to be its complement. So I believe I do have that color. Yeah, let's give this a try. So take some of that yellow-green and mix it in with some magenta. Let's see what happens. Almost looks a little orangey, doesn't it? Interesting. And that's because this lends towards yellow. Yellow with magenta makes a nice orange. All right, add a little bit more magenta in there and see. Interesting, interesting. I'm also, for the fun of it, just going to try a green. See, this is what happens once you start experimenting with color. You want to keep going. What happens if I mix this color with that color? It's fun. But I feel like that yellow-green was a bit too light to really tone it down. This almost looks more vibrant to me. So I'm going to take a little bit of green, a little bit of magenta. Let's see what happens. That really darkened it up. Oh gosh, it's beautiful. Beautiful! And what happens if I mix a little of this green with that green? And then with magenta. That one came out pretty green. I'm not crazy about that one. All right, so that's it. That is your Wednesday art snack. Play with color. And this isn't even the month of color, but we're playing with value. Playing with values. So this was with this is what happens when you don't make notes right away. Oh, this was with yellow-green. And this was with more yellow-green. My scientific notes, how do you like that? This was with hooker's green. And finally, with hooker's green plus yellow-green. All right, gang, that's all I got for you today. Do this exercise. Let me know how it went. Post some notes and color combinations in the comment section and paint through it. I would love to see what you're up to, how it went. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.